welcome to a cover story conversation with a very special friend and an author, Nilanjan Mukhopadhyay, who's out with his latest book, The Demolition and the Verdict, Ayodhya and the Project to Reconfigure India. I mean, you don't need me to tell you how important this book is, especially in today's time, especially with the UP election just around the corner. But what I like about the book, Nilanjan, is the fact that, it's not just about the temple, but also the, how the move to politicize Ram, from a very benign, all-encompassing, inclusive figure to this rather divisive and aggressive Ram that we are seeing play out in the political battlefield today. And what Nilanjan has also done is trace the political careers of a lot of people who are relevant in the BJP with this rise of Hindutva and how they played the politics of the temple. So it's not just about the temple, but it's also the people involved around it, and of course you and me, because you and me are also facing what is happening in the fallout of the temple politics. Nilanjan's also written a book on the RSS, on Prime Minister Narendra Modi. So Nilanjan, this is your fourth book or your fifth book?
My fifth book.
Missed a couple in the middle, did I?
Thank you. I must tell you about my first and my the third book. First of all, I must thank you for getting me on a show and using such glowing words to talk about the book. I'm really thankful to you, and I really value the judgment and opinion of people who have been colleagues in the profession, and we have also worked together in some distant past in a magazine, Sunday.
Around the demolition time, I think we met.
No, after that, around the time when Mr. Vajpayee was the Prime Minister first, that's the time, when we worked together, and it was really, I value your judgment. And, my first book was published in 94. That was immediately after the demolition of the mosque. And I keep telling people that Ayodhya has been my obsessive compulsive disorder for the last 35 years. I was in my mid-20s when I went to Ayodhya for the first time, about a year and a half after the Babri Masjid was opened to Hindu devotees and they could go in. At that time, I was in my mid-20s. I turned 60 as I was completing this book. This 35 years of there, if we actually look at my brain as a kind of a hard, computer. So there's been one disc which has been reserved for Ayodhya not because, I have written extensively on it, but also because Ayodhya is one definitive issue which shapes everything that is happening around. If you actually take a very logical and a rational view of it, eventually it gets linked to the kind of legitimacy, the thought behind it got in the course of the Ayodhya agitation. So we have all seen this unfurling in front of our eyes. 35 years, Priya, yours and mine, have almost, kind of gone through with this thing unfolding in front of, us, in the profession. Today's almost 65% of Indians are below the age of 35. So these are the people who really do not have, any living memory of the prehistory of what the Ayodhya agitation was all about, about the period, how it suddenly came to the fore. So they've always seen, this is also 2022 will also be the 30th anniversary year of the demolition of the mosque. So they've lived with just this vacant space. So I think, this vacant space is extremely metaphoric, and now it is being replaced by a new structure, over which people have different perspectives. So I think this vacant space, what existed there and what will come up by the end of 23 and is in a way, it defines the transition which has happened, and what I use the word reconfiguration of India has actually taken place in front of our eyes.
You also write about the irony that although Narendra Modi was not there in Ayodhya, but he's the one who's really gained, or it's really identified his politics. Let's be polite about it. So a little bit about how Ayodhya has issues affected Modi and how it affected Advani. Two people who I think are really gained in stature after with the Ram Janmabhoomi movement.
In my biography of Mr. Modi, which I did, and 2011, 12, I worked on it. It was published in 2013. I had made one statement about which a lot of eyebrows were raised, but that has been a factual statement, that Ayodhya was not in the political CV of Mr. Modi till 2013. Thereafter, it has become features in a major way, and after the August 5th, 2020 Bhumi Pujan, which Mr. Modi performed, he has actually indelibly signed, the entire timeline of Ayodhya Ram Temple in a big way. One of the points which I make in this book is that while Mr. Advani was the one who actually brought the Ram Temple issue to the forefront, made it part of the central issue of our political discourse, at some point he became diffident. He was not very confident that this is going to be the issue which will eventually enable him to become prime minister, which was obviously his ambition. So that is why in 95 he yielded space to Mr. Vajpayee, because he was not sure that whether he'll be able to bring others along. In 96, Mr. Vajpayee became prime minister. For 13 days, it did not happen. No other ally came, because the BJP still had, quote unquote, the stigma of the hardline of Mr. Advani. 98, we saw Mr. Vajpayee becoming the prime minister, but on a diluted agenda, in the sense that the three core issues, 370, Ram Temple, and Universal Civil Code, were kept out of the national agenda of governance. So Mr. Advani, by the time in 2004, the BJP lost the election, he was convinced that in India, if anything is going to work, you can enter the center stage only from either the left flank or from the center. You cannot enter from the right flank. But I argue in this book that Mr. Modi had it in him, a belief right from the early days, from 89 onwards, that Ayodhya is going to be the passport to BJP getting complete hegemony of Indian politics, and he persevered with it. I also argue that in 2002, Mr. Modi became what he is today primarily because the car sevaks were returning from Ayodhya. That led to the Godhra carnage and then the Gujarat riots, and the rest is history. So if Ayodhya agitation had not continued and was not a certain Vishwa Hindu program from which these car sevaks were returning in February 2002, Mr. Modi wouldn't have become what he is today. So he persevered with it. And eventually in 2014, he became prime minister. It was not primarily the Hindutva agenda, but it was definitely in the backdrop. It was Vikas in the forefront. The foundation was Hindutva. In 2019, we saw a slight different variation of Hindutva, that is a more muscular and aggressive nationalism, which ensured a victory. And immediately after 2019 victory, we saw a series of legislative actions which furthered Hindutva, in the sense that 370 was repealed, the triple talaq was banned, and of course, linking citizenship with religion.
You also write that it was Modi who always linked Hindutva and Bharatiyata, this aggressive nationalism. If you're not a good Hindu, you're not a good nationalist, and vice versa. That's really been his smartest strategy so far also.
Absolutely true. He has been absolutely faithful to the basic tenets of Hindutva, which were codified by V.D. Savarkar about 100 years ago. So he has never actually strayed away from this, never had if and but, kind of a thing, position. It's always been undiluted Hindutva. It might not have been put in the forefront, and many people might have assumed that he has changed heart. But Mr. Modi, if you actually looked out clinically, he has. Actually, there's a remarkable consistency of that man. You might disagree with that ideology. Like, for instance, when I wrote the biography, he was aware of the fact that I did not subscribe to the belief of cultural nationalism, and I was a firm believer in territorial nationalism. And I say that I have ideological divergences with the RSS thinking, with the BJP thinking, But Mr. Modi, I would say, that's a remarkable consistency. Never one, like Mr. Advani went to Pakistan, suddenly found secularism in Jinnah. These kind of compromises Mr. Modi has not made. He went to Pakistan to meet Nawaz Sharif, to serve his purpose, not to go and make a gesture to domestic politics. Whenever he goes outside, whenever he deals with Pakistan, he's all the time addressing the domestic constituency.
You say that the equation between, first of all, the Savarkar one, because the Savarkar view of a casteless Hindu is what I think Narendra Modi is also espousing. That fits in with his whole politics of Kamandal versus Mandal also.
True.
But then,
no, I think that's a very valid point that you raise. In 1928, when Savarkar was still confined to Ratnagiri district. He was not confined in a jail at that point, but he was told by the British two things. One is that you cannot get outside the municipal boundaries of Ratnagiri, and second, you cannot participate in any form of political activity. So he was very active in the temple entry movement, which is to allow entry of the Dalits into, they were at that time called the depressed classes, to allow them entry into temples. Now, Savarkar was the one who actually believed that till the time you are able to break down the caste divisions, you'll not be able to forge Hindu identity. Somehow, in the middle of the line, after the death of Hedgewar in Golwalkar, that line got diffused, in the sense that Golwalkar was supportive of the caste system. But in 1973, when Balasaheb Devras became the Sarsang Chalak after Golwalkar's death, he's the one who actually gave this call for the need for the RSS to widen its social umbrella. He called for Samajik Samrastai. It took him a long time to actually be able to do it, but he's the one who actually took the initiative, and it was under his stewardship, I would say, and since that a certain amount of guidance was there definitely for the Ayodhya agitation, that in 1989, when the first Shilanyas was done, which really became the issue which set up the agenda for the 1989 election, which Rajiv Gandhi lost. The Shilanyas was performed by a Dalit leader from Bihar who eventually went to join the BJP, became a member of the Legislative Council, a minister, and is now a member of the Ram Janmabhoomi Trust. So that is a very symbolic positioning of that person, somebody from the Dalit performing the Shilanyas, after which they discussed, and Ashok Singhal had declared that we have laid not just the foundation of the Ram temple, lekin humne Hindu Rashtra ki neev rakhi hai. This was the exact statement which he made to all of us journalists in 1989 in Ayodhya.
But 1989 also you traced that that's when the angry Hindu also came up. The riots that took place was around that time. That's also traced.
Oh yes. We have seen, that how I say, that how the vocabulary has changed. When people like us, I grew up in North India despite being born in Bengal. It was a very common greeting, Ram Ram or Jai Siya Ram. That is all. Through the course, we don't hear Jai Siya Ram any longer. Essentially, it's now Jai Shri Ram. Jai Shri Ram, from being a day-to-day greeting, a daily greeting, has become an aggressive war cry. It's shouted out loud in every political statement, in every political meeting. So that is the way the politicization, the militarization of Ram has happened through the Ayodhya agitation. From the benign, from the humanistic Ram, he has become the war hero.
That's when, in fact, living in Delhi, and I'll say also, I don't know whether you've seen that very angry Hanuman posters on cars.
Oh yes, of course. That has been.
But it was never the angry; it was the mischievous.
Exactly. And it, the angry Hanuman, it kind of coincided with the rise of the return of the BJP in Uttar Pradesh and the emergence of Yogi Adityanath, and he definitely calls himself a Hanuman Bhakt.
But before that, I want to ask you a question. Who is now in you the Hindu Hriday Samrat? Is it Narendra Modi, or is Yogi giving him tough competition for that?
Well, you have touched what is a very sensitive chord within not just the BJP, but in the entire Sangh Parivar. We have to remember that Yogi Adityanath is not from the RSS. He came from outside. He has actually roots in the Hindu Mahasabha, whatever remains of it, the Gorakhdam Peeth. From there he came in. He also has his own outfit called the Hindu Yuva Vahini, which despite he breaking links with it officially, does continue to pursue the same agenda which he had actually believed in December last month. They organized this meeting in Delhi where they took a vow to usher in Hindu Rashtra here. So Mr. Yogi Adityanath is definitely a different kind of a chief minister than the other BJP chief ministers in other states. He is far more autonomous. He was not the first choice. He is the one who also projects his image more than the other chief minister. He's the one who also has not hidden his ambitions for a national role. Not ever stated when, but yes, the question does get raised whenever we talk about the internal dynamics about Mr. Modi after 2022 in this election if the BJP wins Uttar Pradesh very well, with a great margin, then obviously Yogi Adityanath would be seen as a possible successor to Mr. Modi. Whether he is going to wait enough for the succession to happen naturally or get more ambitious, we really do not know. What will happen to Mr. Amit Shah at that particular point, because he remains the closest confidant of Mr. Modi. So these are all questions, which does not really get discussed, but is there at the back of the mind of everyone. And that is what I think, I do sense a slight amount of tension is actually too heavy word to use, but some amount of minor divergence on approach throughout this campaign. Also, I am seeing it. It would eventually boil down to the seat distribution. Does it get divided between that these are Adityanath seats and these are the seats of the central leadership? And then are they going to actually campaign in each other's seats? So a lot has to be seen that what happens, the verdict will also determine the internal equation within the BJP, especially when it comes to this big three now.
I'm going to take a break, and since I have Nilanjan in front of me, I can't not talk about the UP elections, and especially since Ayodhya is very much part of the dialogue, the narrative there. Before I take you to UP elections, I just want to ask you a quick question. You've not really talked about, you've not just touched on politics of the right, but even what is happening within the Muslims camp, the fallout between the Shah Imam and Shahabuddin, and how they played their role in this whole Ayodhya tangle.
No, it was all a question about who would be the undisputed Muslim leader. By and large, the Muslim community had stayed within the political parties from after independence onward till, through the emergency period. We know that Shah Imam did definitely take a political position after emergency was lifted, gave a call to defeat Indira Gandhi. That is what led to the great support which the Muslims gave to the Janata Party in the 77 elections. Eventually, they came back to the Congress. It's a different matter. But that is what set the agenda, that there is a space for a slightly outside the party system Muslim political leadership. That is what was up for grabs. And when the Shah Bano judgment happened, in fact, I spent a lot of time in my book talking about the Shah Bano judgment and how Rajiv Gandhi backtracking and annulling the Supreme Court, a very progressive judgment, on that particular case, provided the opportunity to the Indian right to actually raise the demand for the Ram temple, and then it eventually became a quid pro quo. That's what happened. So there was some kind of a race for the political hegemony on the leadership of the Muslim constituency. Sayyid Shahabuddin, who had once been a fairly progressive, he had in fact been a communist student leader in his youth days, and his entry into the foreign service, I also tackle in my book, was facilitated by no one else but Jawaharlal Nehru, who told his people that why are you raising an objection on this? What he did as a student, which basically raised flags when Nehru went to Patna, was something. I think the exact word which he used, I quoted, something like the belligerence of the youth, which is very natural. You have to understand it. So
that in today's context.
And Shahabuddin entered politics saying that, in fact, I quote him also, that after 1971 war, Muslims of India realized that Pakistan as an option for them had come to an end. So that is the point on which he comes to an entry. And then eventually the way things played out and what is happening now and the kind of regular questions and being asked to prove their loyalty to the Indian state is put to them. I think it's a tremendous reconfiguration of India, within in the last few decades, which has happened. And eventually, Shahabuddin also died a very lonely man. And I had tremendous disagreements with him, but I have immense fond memories of him. In fact, I thank him also.
Drop into his house pretty often.
Yes, very often. That is it. Right opposite what is now a big 5-star hotel in Delhi. It was one of these bungalows. Any one of us could just walk in any time.
Those, in fact, you talk about those days, just one or two lines, but when one could actually walk into, politicians at civil hours, not in the middle of the.
Yes, yes, obviously, at that point, one could actually hop out from a press conference of one of the parties and then go to the residence of and say that, look, these people said, do you have a reaction? I still remember the day Vishwa Hindu Parishad announced the Shila Pujan, Shila Yatra, and Shilanyas program. This was sometime in January, February 1989. So after the Vishwa Hindu Parishad announced these programs, I went to Mr. Shahabuddin's residence and I told him about it. So his face was absolutely shaken. I said, what happened? This is quite a funny program. Eeta leke jayenge. That's what I told him exactly. So he said, no, Nilanjan, you're not understanding. With this, they will be able to ensure that every Hindu feels connected, that with the agitation, they will think they have participated in this agitation by not even going to Ayodhya, only coming out of their home, and when these bricks are taken in processions, they will think कि हमने भी इसमें हिस्सा ले लिया. And that is what happened. 1989 was the transformative period, both in terms of increase of communal rights, I give those figures in my book, and also the way popular support, the entire legitimacy which the Hindutva idea got, to a great extent it happened through 1989.
In fact, that whole idea of participation is something that Prime Minister Modi used for the Sardar Patel statue, and now also for the building of the temple. There is
Jan Bhagidari, which Sheila Dikshit had started. He's the one who has again recast it, and with new energy he's brought in.
Just before we run out of time, UP elections, because again we are seeing it's a fight between Mandal and Kamandal. Yogi is the face of the Hindu right, the Ayodhya. He wanted to contest from there. Why wasn't he? Was that his decision to go to Gorakhpur, or the party didn't want him to be the face of Ayodhya?
I would think, it was a clear message that national icons belong to the central leadership. It's a very bold statement. I think this is what was indicated to him, because from what we picked up, he definitely had it in him to take either Ayodhya or maybe Mathura. I also anticipated Mathura because that's the next battle line. Kashi is almost done. It's just a question of corridor to bas jhanki hai, asli mandir baki hai. That's a new slogan.
Yeah,
I wonder whether you heard this or not. So anyway, Mathura is the next target. In Varanasi, there's already a court case going on. So is the case with Mathura. It all depends. They'll have to repeal the Places of Worship Act, which I definitely think will be a major focus area before 24. I'm not saying that it will be repealed, but that is going to be something that we have to keep track on. That is that.
We also need a mission, something to get all the voters in.
Definitely, because we have seen in the last 7.5 years that nothing works better for the BJP than Hindutva, and the biggest stumbling block for them is caste divisions within Hindu society. Once again, in the run-up to the UP elections, the caste has come to the fore. The social coalition, which was very carefully put together by the party under Mr. Amit Shah's, actually nuts and bolts operations from 2013 onward, seem to be cracking a bit. I do not know whether this is going to eventually crack or not. Very early days in the campaign also, and we have to wait till the 10th of March to be able to say that whether the social coalition of the lower OBCs and the non-dominant communities within the Dalits remain with the BJP or not, or does it shows that eventually Mandal and Kamandal, these remains the two main fault lines within Indian political system. And whenever there is a crack in the social coalition, the BJP has no option but to go and step up the temple cause. I'm using the word temple cause because it actually is just symbolic use of the word.
In fact, that's what, I met somebody in the SMAJwadi party, and they were saying that because the politics of Mandal is getting more play in the narrative, they might do something to polarize the votes, not a Pulwana type incident, but something that will again polarize the Hindu right and Hindu Rashtra is in danger, Hinduism in danger, that kind of sentiment.
Well, very difficult to say that if there's going to be anything, like that, it's not for us, as responsible journalists to speculate. But definitely in the narrative, we have seen a greater return. We have seen Mr. Amit Shah talk about the Friday namaz. We have seen Yogi Adityanath talk about, we speak about Ganna, they speak about Jinnah. And we have seen Mr. Modi talk about the unifying capacity of Sanatan Dharma of Hinduism. So so it definitely, religion is definitely greater part of their political vocabulary in the run up to the elections and during campaign.
Where do you see the election going, in terms of the Akhilesh versus Yogi fight? What's your take on it?
Very difficult. I'm not the one who is going to get trapped into saying that this is the likely event. But yes, definitely I have written and I have also stated in a fairly long interview with another fellow journalist, that the BJP is definitely rattled, but BJP also has tremendous capacity to be able to come back and be able to spin a new narrative through the campaign. We had seen on several occasions since 2014 that the BJP has that innate capacity that whenever see their campaign faltering, to give it a new turn. So this is still a very early days in the campaigning. Campaigning is also not going on at the moment because of COVID restrictions. So whatever is happening primarily through the media and through statements and through organizing events which are happening, like yesterday the BJP did, getting Aparna Yadav on their side. The Samajwadi Party has organized various people deserting the BJP and coming and joining them. So all that is happening. Still a lot to happen between now and the 10th of February when Western UP goes to vote for the first round, and then eventually the 7th of March when the last, in Purab. But I keep telling, reminding people that what Sanjeev Balyan told me once, after the 2014, and he was gloating over the victory in 2014. So he said, ki Uttar Pradesh mein to paschim se hi hawa chalti hai. That is why, in fact, when there were reports in the media that the BJP wanted elections from the east, it actually showed that, the phases to begin from eastern UP and coming down to western UP. But eventually it did not happen. So western UP is definitely a troubling spot for the BJP, primarily because of the farmers' issue there, which has actually forced the BJP to repeal the laws. So let's see.
But just one last question: we've seen all these leaders leave the BJP to join the BJP, leave the BJP to join Samajwadi Party. Are they following the pressures of the community, or will the community follow a leader like Swami Prasad Maurya?
Very difficult to say, because these are people who cannot be just dismissed as people who were not to get the tickets. That is why they have left the party. These are people who have actually a vertical line of command right to the villages, and possibly one of the reasons as to why they have shifted loyalties is because they're not there. They were not there in the BJP for ideological reasons. They were there because in 2017 they felt that this is going to be the winning party, so it's better to be with them. So these are people who are actually barometers. You can actually understand what is the pulse. So according to them, the BJP is in a tough spot. Now we do not know whether their reading is correct or not. It's only the results. Eventually, what people decide, we will get to know that whether their assessment was correct, that the BJP is facing a massive anti-incumbent sentiment, and for a variety of reasons.
On that note, congratulations on your book, and I'm sure this is very much going to be in the headlines for the next month or so, if not later, more, because I think December 23 is when they plan the construction of the temple.
They plan to throw it open to the devotees in December 23, right in time for the 2024 Lok Sabha elections.
I'll leave you on that very tantalizing last word. Thank you so much, Nilanjan, for this conversation.
Thank you.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.